Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Beach. I'm from the Human Resources Partnership for Strategy and Innovation. And on behalf of the organizing committee, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to another What Matters to Me and Why series talk. First, some housekeeping announcements. This talk is being filmed, so if you would like to not appear on the video, please sit closer to the back. During the question and answer period, we ask you please wait for the microphone before you ask your question so we can all hear you. As staff, faculty, and students, we spend much of our time dealing with exams, homework, lectures, budgets, personnel, and other topics, doing the things that are required to keep the university and our careers moving forward. What Matters to Me and Why is a chance to take a few minutes each month to stop and take a break and learn about each other. Every month, we have the opportunity to hear from someone who shapes UCI through their daily activities. They give a short, informal talk, followed by plenty of time for questions and discussion. There is no prescribed topic. Speakers are asked simply to answer the question, what matters to you and why? Authentically and frankly, and let it go wherever it goes. The series provides a forum for speakers to talk about their values, beliefs, and motivations, and perhaps what has shaped those through personal experiences in the highs and lows of life that they've encountered along the way. The hope is to strengthen bonds between us, the faculty, staff, students who teach, learn, and work here, and to celebrate both the diversity of our community and the commonalities that bind us together. One thing that is really nice about What Matters to Me and Why is that it brings together people from across all campus, as well as undergraduates, graduate students, staff, and faculty. So it is our tradition to give people a chance to introduce themselves to each other. If you're on Zoom, please use the chat to introduce yourselves. We hope that you share your name, department, whether you're a student, staff, or faculty, and anything else you'd like to share. This will only be for a moment or two, and then we'll bring you back to introduce our wonderful speaker. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay, so I'll be introducing Michael Dessen. So composer and trombonist Michael Dessen creates highly interactive, improvisatory music in collaboration with leading artists while also working as a university professor to expand institutional spaces and partnerships for cultural innovation. As a composer, he has been recognized with awards from Chamber Music America, New Music USA, and the Frum Foundation, and as a trombonist, his original sound and broad skills have made him a valued side person for many innovative musicians. He has also worked extensively since 2007 in telematic music, composing, performing, and co-directing dozens of networked multi-site concerts with international collaborators, as well as leading programs connecting youth in California and South America to explore the pedagogical and intercultural potentials of musical telepresence. Dessen has published writings on topics including networked music, the Asian American creative music movement, and the intercultural African diasporic collaboration, and his teachers include Yusuf Latif, George E. Lewis, and Anthony Davis. He is a professor at the University of California, Irvine, where he co-founded an MFA and PhD program in ICIT, or Integrated Composition, Improvisation, and Technology, and currently serves as the chair of the music department, jazz program coordinator, and director of the Gassman Electronic Music Studios. It's my honor and pleasure to pass it off to Michael Dessen. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. I don't need that, but I'll put it back. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's such a pleasure to see so many friends and people. I don't know who's on Zoom, but great friends here. Everybody sits in the back, just like students. You never grow out of that. So it's kind of always, I'm used to it, lonely up here, from classes. But thank you, Isabella, for the introduction. Thank you to the committee for the work they do on this series. And thank you all for being here to listen. I really feel very humbled and privileged to have your attention and time to talk to you, especially about things like this. So when I was 12 years old, my parents took me to a lecture by an actor at a university. And he began by drawing a horizontal line on the chalkboard, explaining that we usually think of time as moving from the past into the future. But then he drew a spiral and said that as we expand outward over time, our new experiences give us a different angle, a different perspective for looking at our past cycles. So this really blew my 12-year-old mind. For one, I had never thought about time in this kind of open-ended, questioning way, and it never occurred to me that in college people were having conversations like this. I thought he was just going to tell them how to act better, you know. And I don't remember, he probably did, I don't remember that part, I just remember this part. So I'll come back to that idea later, but I wanted to begin here because I've chosen to respond to this prompt as they gave me some guidance with a series of stories from my life, which seems to be what people want for this. And they're mostly chronological, but I really do feel like it is more of a spiral as I keep kind of looking back on things and understanding them in new ways. So I'm not going to share tons of pictures like this, but I'll put up one baby picture. This is, and I'm doing this mostly because right now, with all the things going on in the world, we all need some smiling baby pictures. This, by the way, this is 1968, and outside of where I grew up in the South, but I was born in Wisconsin, and outside of where I was living when I was 1 year old in 1968 was also a very turbulent and polarized time in this country. So it's nice to know that there must be smiling babies out there right now who have no idea what's going on outside their doors. So from as early as I can remember, music mattered to me a lot. I grew up surrounded by amateur musicians who would sing folk music and play guitars, often in collective sing-alongs. And as a child, I picked up songs quickly by ear, playing on harmonicas and any other instrument I could get my hands on. Back then, I could never have explained why this kind of participatory folk music mattered to me. I just felt that it did. Looking back now, I see that this kind of music making mattered because it cultivated feelings of community and interconnectedness through sound, vibration, and song. I feel fortunate to have had these opportunities early in life to experience how music can elicit awe and enable us to feel part of something larger than our individual self. Like many of us, I also had similar feelings in nature and other contexts, but for me, music was always a very powerful space for that kind of experience. Of course, growing up also included the opposite, experiences that were disturbing, that amplified feelings of being alienated and separated from others. For example, as a young child, I always looked up to my grandfather as a wise, friendly old man, until around age 8 when I discovered that he was a racist, a moment that fundamentally changed my perception and my faith in the adult world. So even as a white person, growing up with all the privileges that brings, I grew up in North Carolina during the 1970s, and this exposed me to the ongoing power of racist violence in this country. Gradually, I realized that many of the folk songs I knew from childhood came from social justice struggles, such as the early 20th century labor movement and, of course, the civil rights movement. I was also shaped during those years by some powerful live musical experiences, such as when my father, who was an amateur folk musician, took me to a tiny cafe to hear very up close, like 4 feet away, one of his musical heroes, the great and often under-recognized singer and guitarist, Odetta. So over time, especially moving into adolescence, something that began to matter to me deeply was how to understand this paradox of interconnectedness and community alongside violence and alienation. And in that unsettling and unsettled context, music increasingly became a powerful grounding force for me, especially as I began to relate to it more as an intentional practice. This expansion in my relationship with music happened gradually, but one story I can share to capture it is my first experience in a symphony orchestra. At age 13, I'd been playing trombone in school for 2 years, but that wasn't very challenging, middle school band. So my mother wisely signed me up for lessons with a teacher who would become an important mentor and who also quickly got me into a youth orchestra. It It was actually all high school students, so I was young, and that was pretty weird, but they need, as often happens, they need a third trombone player, so I got in. And on my first day, we were rehearsing Schubert's Unfinished Symphony. So this is the top line of the trombone part to that, and if you look at it, it looked to me incredibly boring, actually. I sat down and saw this on the stand, and I thought, this is really, really dull, because compared to my middle school band music, where we got to play all the time, and we played lots of notes, here you count about 26, 7 bars of rest while you don't do anything, and then when you come in there, you play 2 notes, dot, dot, same note even, and then you wait a bunch of more bars and don't do anything, and then you play a few more notes. I thought, this is really stupid. Why would I want to do this? I don't get to do it. The strings are doing all sorts. I don't get to do anything. So I made a mental note that I was going to quit. As soon as my mom picked me up, I'm done with this. No, don't want to. I'll go back to band, you know. Then the conductor came in, who was a very serious young man, Chapel Hill Youth Orchestra, but this might have well has been the Berlin Philharmonic for this guy. He was very serious, and he got on the podium, and without saying a word, raised his baton, and everybody completely shut up and gave him their attention. And he started the piece, which begins with the low strings, the cellos and basses, playing this very quiet, low, dark, melodic line that curves through space and ends on the musical equivalent of a question mark. It just is a short little moment, and it kind of ends in this mysterious way. And I was watching all these kids, you know, focus intensely on getting these sounds out of their instrument and playing them exactly together, and I was transfixed. And then the conductor turns and brings in everybody else and starts this kind of groove. The low strings are doing this dump, da, 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 and they're doing, and then the upper strings are playing this fast thing, and that sets the stage for one oboe and clarinet to come in and waft these long notes over in this kind of floating way. And I'm like watching all these things, and I'm not going to play you any sound today, because I don't want you to actually just think about what it sounded like. I want you to imagine sitting in the middle of all that, sitting among 60 people, struggling with these instruments, the breath, the spit, the bows, the whole thing, and watching everybody just trying to coordinate their activity to make all this happen, and all these layers coming in and out. This stuff is happening, and another thing comes in and goes out. It kind of turns, the harmonies change, and it builds and builds. And then finally, I'm just absorbed in all this, and I hear these 2 notes, bum, bum, and I realized those were my notes. I just completely lost track of time, had no idea what was going on. I was just fascinated by the whole thing, and it was, you know, probably about 60 seconds. But I was just absorbed in this sound world, and forgot to play. So the conductor went back and started the piece and called me out in front of everybody, which is very embarrassing on your first day. Said, you know, second trombone, count, you know. But I was hooked on this. I thought, well, this is, now I see, this is interesting, actually. So I want to actually highlight that, you know, these shifts in sort of, that was a big shift for me. It's a very vivid memory, but these shifts don't happen overnight. But these moments do kind of stand out as transition points when I started to realize, especially now looking back, that my relationship to music was changing. I could still enjoy my family's folk singing sessions just as much, but this was something else. This was a new way into that feeling of togetherness through music, a way that required and also rewarded a deeply focused attention to detail and a commitment to craft and practice. Now, this story, especially that last bit I just said, always appeals very strongly to people who are really into Western classical music. So I want to be clear, which, by the way, only exists as a construct, a social construct, like all musical traditions. And if you want to talk about that, we can do it in a class later. But I mention this because I want to make clear that what I just said about commitment to attention and detail and craft and practice, I'm not saying that that's specific only to classical music. That applies to so many musical traditions. And also I want to make clear that even though some of my formative experiences came through classical music, which I am very grateful for, of understanding that notion of musical practice, eventually that same impulse and attention and practice and ethos of making music took me to many other traditions as well. So that didn't happen right away. Throughout high school, I was pretty much absorbed with classical music, and I played and studied extensively in those contexts. I went to summer orchestra camps and the whole deal, and competitions and everything. So after high school, I went straight into a conservatory to do a performance degree, And I'd been so absorbed in that world that I really thought I was just going to go do the degree, get out, play in an orchestra, be a professional classical trombonist forever, which is great for those of you that want to do that. But by halfway through my first year in the conservatory, those plans completely dissolved because my peers, not the faculty, but my peers exposed me to a really wide range of new musical possibilities as soon as I got there. I'd grown up in a pretty small town. And I became fascinated with these things I was learning about once I moved up to a bigger city and a conservatory and met kids from across the world who were listening to other things. I became fascinated with jazz and contemporary composition and electronic music and avant-garde rock and many non-Western traditions, especially music from West Africa, India, and Indonesia. So for any of the students who might be listening to this, I should note that this was before the internet, if you can imagine such a thing. And so to expand our listening options, we had to go to stores and buy records, maybe find them in a library or find the rare live concert. In addition, I was also expanding my musical horizons through freelance performing. For example, I once got a gig, I think it was during my freshman year, summer, playing with the OJs, which is a classic, oh wait, I missed the OJs somehow. These are the records. I meant to show you these. The records, some of the records that we were listening to. But one summer I got a gig playing with the OJs, which was a great R&B group. And by the time I played with them, they were older than this, but they still wore the same stuff and had the same move. They were tight with their moves. And so this was a gig I played in a small city in Virginia. There were about like 5,000 people in this concert hall. And I think me and maybe 2 other horn players were the only white people in the entire event, you know. So that was a cultural experience I'd never had before. And I also got gigs playing with salsa bands, even in Rochester in the 80s, where myself and maybe, again, 1 or 2 horn players were the only non-Latino people in not just the band, but the whole venue. So those experiences of freelancing took me into spaces where I was a cultural outsider and I wouldn't have been likely to go otherwise. But just as important, they made me feel like a beginner musician all over again, because I had to survive these gigs, I had to quickly figure out how to produce new sounds, new timbres, new rhythmic feels on my instrument, and also how not to get lost in forms where few details were notated in the score. So that required learning again how to use my ear, but in different ways, paying attention to different kinds of details in this different musical culture. So as much as in the classical world, that practice of attention to details brought deep new rewards as I learned about some of these new to me musical traditions, because all of these traditions at their best are incredibly rich. So as all of those experiences expanded my understanding of the vastness of music and culture, I graduated from the conservatory, and I did finish my degree and do all the things for that degree, but I graduated with this huge array of new interests and more than ever, and I had no clue what to do with that, how to integrate them. I would later find mentors who helped me with that challenge, as I'll come back to. But when I graduated, I wasn't really concerned with that. I wasn't so interested in the music profession. I just wanted to figure out actually what mattered to me and why. That was what was really interesting to me. And that was partly because towards the end of my undergraduate years, I got very interested in reading more widely in philosophy and especially Buddhism and Taoism, and became very interested in meditation. So again, for current students, I need to clarify, this was a different time. There were no yoga studios next to the Trader Joe's, and you couldn't Google like something that you wanted to learn about and just find a Wikipedia page about what is Taoism or whatever. There was nothing like that. You had, if you wanted to find out about these things, you had to get books from a store or library, or if you wanted to like learn how to do Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, you had to actually find the people who knew about those things, and you had to do that by seeking them out in all these weird little subcultural spaces. It was not, they weren't in the strip mall. So in short, that's what I did. I spent 5 years completely removed from the profession of music and academia and everything, including living and working for a year in an artisan miso factory on an organic farm, and then living for 2 years in a monastic Zen Buddhist community here in California. So I want to clarify, I'm not a Buddhist with a capital B, and I definitely am not an expert in Buddhism. This is not really a lecture on it. I'm not qualified to do that, and I'm not a member of any religious tradition. But in those years, I was searching for tools that could help me make sense of the world, including that paradoxical feeling that I mentioned earlier. at the start of this talk, and I was drawn to Zen Buddhist teachings because of the tools they offered for that, by which I mean both analytical frameworks and meditation practices. So I was inspired by writings from ancient figures like Dogen Zenji, to also more contemporary teachers like Charlotte Joko Beck, who were seeking new ways to transpose Zen Buddhist practices and ideas into American context. To briefly give you a sense of why meditation mattered to me then, here's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is one of the most influential figures in contemporary Buddhism. He writes, "Meditation is to be aware of what is going on in our bodies, in our feelings, in our minds, and in the world. Each day, 40,000 children die of hunger. The superpowers now have more than 50,000 nuclear warheads, enough to destroy our planet many times. Yet, the sunrise is beautiful, and the rose that bloomed this morning along the wall is a miracle. Life is both dreadful and wonderful. To practice meditation is to be in touch with both aspects. Please do not think that we must be solemn in order to meditate. In fact, to meditate well, we have to smile a lot." I'd like to add that in Zen Buddhist communities, there is an understanding that even outside of formal meditation practice, each moment is an opportunity to mindfully engage with the world based on your values and intentions. So your practice, as they call it, which was a word that really resonated to me coming out of a long tube of music study and going to this community, and they would say, "How's your practice?" And I thought, "Practice, I know that word." Your practice in this community also takes place, not just when you're in your sitting meditation session, but when you're chopping carrots, cleaning the toilet, doing political activism, sharing a meal with a friend, or for that matter, participating in a faculty meeting or answering your emails. So Thich Nhat Hanh was also one of the key figures in what is called engaged Buddhism, which approaches social justice work from a Buddhist perspective. And central to that work is a term that he coined called interbeing. Interbeing, he writes, is a new word in English, and I hope it will be accepted. We have talked about the many in the one, and the one containing the many. In one sheet of paper, we see everything else: the cloud, the forest, the logger. I am, therefore you are, therefore I am. That is the meaning of interbeing. We inter-are. So one small aspect of that idea of interbeing is how much our individual selves are interlinked with other people. So on that note, I want to share a few details about how my family has mattered to me. I already mentioned examples of my early family-based experiences with music and the support that I was lucky to have early in life from my parents for my musical interests. And as I went into these Buddhist worlds, they were completely foreign to them. They had no idea what any of that stuff was about. I was fortunate to have continuing support from my parents and from my sister, who, by the way, is a famous author of young adult books, Sarah Dessen. They probably worried, all three of them, that I was at risk of descending into some weird cult. But if so, they kept it to themselves and trusted me, for which I'm very grateful. The other family that is, of course, very important to me is the one that came about thanks to those travels I took and would deeply shape all aspects of my adult life. In 1990, while we were both arriving in the Zen Buddhist community, I met Maria Angeles Soto Diaz, who some of you may know because she's a lecturer in our art department, among many other roles here at UCI. We immediately became close friends, fell in love, and eventually left that community to find our way together back into the world outside after a couple years there. So I don't have adequate words to capture the kinds of interbeing that arise through such a long-term life partnership. She and I have moved together through all the stages of our adult careers and lives, including raising our son, who is now finding his own way into post-college life. But among the countless ways she and our son have both shaped me, including Maria Angeles' deep artistic, intellectual, and spiritual practice, and our son's kindness, wisdom, and resilience. One other important aspect is that Maria Angeles is originally from Venezuela. I gave you a little map, just in case you don't remember where that is. Top corner there of South America. She had just immigrated to the US at age 20, which is a great story, by the way, but I can't tell that one. That's for her to tell. When we first met, seeking peace and a community to support her meditation practice. And like me, she'd gone to art school, in her case, as a visual artist, but was seeking something else. So we connected very quickly. Spending time in Venezuela during the 1990s and early 2000s after we got married was very transformative for me. And most importantly, becoming part of her warm, vibrant, extended family has deeply changed my life. This is even more important for me to recognize and highlight right now, given the tragic humanitarian and political crises that the people of that country have endured, which have led to what is now one of the largest international refugee displacements in the world today. Thich Nhat Hanh noted in that earlier quote that to meditate well, we have to smile a lot. And I might transpose that idea drawing on what I've learned from my Latin American family, friends, and more recently, over the past decade, artistic collaborators, to say that to meditate well, some people also have to dance a lot, to laugh a lot, to cook together and eat a lot, to frequently interrupt one another in multi-layered conversations a lot, and also to make art a lot. But what kind of art? How can we be artists in the world responding equally to those wonderful and dreadful parts of life? How do we build a meaningful practice and place as artists, given the vastness of options and histories that we confront? And how do we manage all this while paying the rent? So those were questions that we were grappling with together as we left the Zen Buddhist community and went back into the world. And I really wasn't thinking about a professional career in the arts or academia at all at that time, again. So I found other work, including a very meaningful job for some time as a direct care worker for a mental health agency. But eventually, I learned that the renowned composer and saxophonist Yusef Lateef was teaching at a nearby university where we were living in Amherst. And I couldn't resist the chance to study with him, having known about his music, even though it meant I had to enroll in a master's program, which I really didn't want to do. But it gave me 2 years of lessons with Yusef Lateef, so I thought I'll do it. I've written about Lateef elsewhere, so here I'll simply share that studying closely with him for 2 years was incredibly inspiring. And I know this isn't supposed to be a professional talk, but this is very related to what matters to me and why. Particularly in how he was able to integrate highly divergent materials and methods from different cultural traditions into a uniquely individual creative voice. So studying with him renewed my commitment to creative musical practice and set me back on the path that I'm still on today. My understanding of academic institutions was also deeply shaped by seeing how Lateef, at that point in his 70s, was an underpaid adjunct instructor with a dingy practice room in the basement for his office, despite, by that point, having a renowned career as an artist and a doctoral degree. So I was soon drawn to UC San Diego by the chance to study with George Lewis and Anthony Davis, two other very innovative Black American composers who had an equally deep impact on me. In a new PhD program being developed there, I was given space and guidance to explore across a wide range of areas and to cultivate my own voice as an artist and a scholar. On my first day in that PhD program, I was in a graduate seminar on open improvisation taught by George Lewis. He had us play duos and discuss the music after each performance, and he paired me with a bassist who he had allowed to join the class, even though that person was a very young undergraduate student and had limited conventional skills on his instrument. But what the guy did have was a very fluent ability with more experimental approaches to sound. So he immediately started our duo by playing all kinds of noises, you know, all these weird sounds on his instrument. And I had by that point, some experience with experimental music and different kinds of avant-garde jazz, but I'd never really improvised with someone going in that direction completely in a completely open way. So I responded by doing what I knew I could do well, which was to play my pristine tone I had developed by all those years and play some really intricate and logical motivic development of melodies and rhythms and all these things that I was into from jazz and classical training. So that's what I did, and it wasn't a very interesting duo we played. And after 5 minutes, we kind of found a way to end it, like politely getting out of a conversation that you never really wanted to be in to begin with. So Louis waited for our peers in the class to say some friendly but bland things about it, and I of course thought that he would then jump in and criticize my partner for basically having no ability to play his instrument in any conventional way. Instead, Louis focused his critique on me in a brilliant and oblique way. He started by saying something nice about my tone. You got all these nice tones, Michael. It's really beautiful. And then he said to the bassist, he said, play that thing you were playing at the beginning, that sound you were making. And he went, and then he turned to me and said, can you do that? And I thought, I mean, I'm in front of everybody. I had to try, so I tried to make that sound. I couldn't really do it very well. It wasn't very convincing. I play trombone, he plays bass. It was a totally different sound. And then George said, you remember that other thing you did in the middle? And the bass player played some other weird sound he made in the middle. And he said, can you do that? And I tried, same result. And then instead of spelling it out directly, George said to me, Michael, you know what you could do? Go to the library and get some of those Foley recordings that filmmakers use with animal sounds and practice with them. Take them to the practice room, practice with the animals. That'll help expand your vocabulary. And then he said, okay, next duo, and went on. And I was just like, I was kind of crushed, you know. I was sort of, I have to confess, my ego was really bruised. I had just moved all the way across the country to study with this person. First day in my PhD program, I'm like 30, paired with some 18-year-old who can't play his instrument, and I felt just destroyed in front of everybody. So my ego was hurt, but I knew I had just moved across the country to study with this guy for a reason. He's brilliant. So I took it to heart, and I went and I got and he was right. I got the animal sounds. I spent months in the practice room with records of animal sounds, playing with the frogs and the crickets and the lions and whatever. And it expanded my vocabulary, and it gave me tools on my instrument so that in future contexts of more experimental and open improvised music, I can do a lot more things. And I want to highlight, just a couple weeks ago, I know for a lot of you, this kind of music may not be your cup of tea. You may not even know it exists. But the Angel City Jazz Festival in LA is a wonderful festival with a really interesting and broad, diverse array of music. And just a couple weeks ago, there was this great gig up there I was invited to be a part of, along with like 20 other improvisers from Southern California, crossing people who are in jazz and contemporary music, but all people who have a lot of experience with improvising. And we had this wonderful night a few weeks ago of 4 hours, 7 30-minute sets where we didn't know who we were going to play with. We just showed up, and the organizer just paired us randomly based on a computer draw with 2 other people, and we had like 7 trios back to back. And so it was just fascinating, super fun. And I've been doing that music now. The story I just told is from about 37 years ago. So it's been a long time, or 27 years ago, I guess, 27 years. I've been doing that kind of thing. And I had so much fun the other night doing this, and I was thinking about that story. Like, yeah, there's a reason. There's a community of people around this practice, and it's really wonderful music. It's very different than other kinds of music, but it can be great, like any kind of music, or it can suck, like any kind of music. So, so after that experience, I was reflecting on this, and it took me a while to sink in, but I realized that Louis's point was actually about a broader lesson, and I'm going to wrap up soon, but it goes beyond music. Louis's point was that this kind of music making, there is a community, by that point it had been around for decades, and he was sort of, without even directly doing it, he was bringing me into this world of music making. In that world, this kind of open improvisational music making is fundamentally a relational practice. I had to learn how to listen more deeply and engage more deeply with what that bassist was specifically doing if I wanted to genuinely and successfully collaborate with him in this context. It wasn't enough to just paste our 2 things that we do together. True integration required a different mindset, and it also required practice. So I think about this story in relation to many other areas of my work and professional fields. For one example, much music has been done in the field of jazz studies over recent decades to bring more attention to the contributions of women in jazz forever. But in many jazz history textbooks, the first impulse when this field of scholarship developed was to simply add a sidebar in each chapter, effectively saying, okay, there were women during this decade doing these things, here they are. now we put out the next edition of the book, and we got women covered. That was what a lot of textbooks did, jazz history textbooks, when scholarship around women started to be dug up. So I was once at a conference, and I heard this brilliant scholar, Sherry Tucker, describe this as an overdub mentality in music. When we're recording tracks and we overdub one, we leave all these tracks and we just add a new track, right, in the recording studio. So Sherry said, it's not enough to simply add a new track to jazz history, saying, okay, here's the women track. We're going to add that because now we know about that. She said, as with any other new development, new knowledge, we have to ask how this new knowledge being unearthed changes our understanding of the existing narratives and our understanding of jazz itself. The whole chapter in the textbook has to be rewritten, taking into account the new perspectives that we've gained by traveling further out on the spiral. So I'm going to wrap up this talk in a minute, and you may notice that I've basically just reached the point where I'm in a PhD program. I'm not even talking about the work I've done here at UCI. Many of you know about that work because you're colleagues. But there are various reasons for that, including the fact that this isn't supposed to be a talk about my professional work. But I want to end by just highlighting that the values and ideas I've been discussing, sometimes directly, sometimes obliquely here, have been at the core of all the work that I've been really fortunate to do in my career here at UCI over nearly 20 years, which includes composing and performing, collaborating with many innovative and exciting artists in the field, exploring new technologies of telepresence, writing and sharing research, developing a new PhD program with incredible colleagues and students, teaching diverse undergrad and grad courses, building outreach initiatives such as the Intercultural Telematic Bridges program, infusing all this work with attention to equity inclusion, and most of all, collaborating with our fantastic faculty, staff, and students, many of you who are here, on institution building in many different ways and roles. So those of you that know me know that I can talk, so I, of course, have plenty more to say. But I want to stop here so that we have a little time for a conversation. So thank you so much for listening, and I'd now love to hear from you. Do I need to do anything here? You want to? Do they need a mic? Oh, okay. You were like, oh, you do that for the Zoom. Okay.
So much.
Is it on?
Is this on? Okay. Thank you so much. That's been a great conversation. So for those of you who have questions, this is our question and answer portion of the series. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and either myself or Isabel will pass you the mic.
Andrew's got it.
Hello, my name's Diana. Good
Hi,
to see you,
Diana. How are
Michael.
you? Good to see you.
It was amazing learning about your journey and how your family had a deep influence on your music as well. Hearing you mention that you saw Odetta at such a young age blew my mind. When I saw a clip of her performing Waterboy and how she not just played with the instrument, but slapped it.
Yeah, she was known for that. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I was just wondering, what was that experience like for you?
That was amazing. It was a tiny little cafe in Chapel Hill. You know, I'm sure she made barely nothing on that gig. When I think about it from now professional perspective, it's like she was probably touring around trying to survive. It was some little cafe restaurant in Chapel Hill in like 1975 or whatever. I was probably like 8 years old. But my dad was really into her. I mean, my dad was, he was into, you know, everything from like Pete Seeger through the, you know, the Dylan and all that stuff from the 50s and 60s. But Odetta had a huge influence on a lot of these white folk musicians associated with the folk music, and she didn't ever get quite the exposure, but she had this powerful presence. I just remember being a young child seeing her like 10 feet away in this little place. And I mention that partly because I think live music is so important. It's so important, you know. It's just not the same. You can go on Spotify and stream something through your little earbuds and walk around and think, wow, that's great music. But sitting in front of someone with that presence, you know, is different. As you all know, half of you are here from the arts, so you know I'm preaching to the choir, literally. But it was very powerful, and at the time I didn't really understand anything about where that was coming from. I just saw this powerful performance. But that's the spiral part. You look back later and think, wow, that was part of a whole movement and moment, you know.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to your inner being of it all too, because when it comes to Odetta or Leadbelly, they were big influences on Nirvana and Kurt Cobain.
Exactly right.
And that kind of pipeline is wild and the beauty of music. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Exactly. I saw Nolan back there.
Hi, Professor Dessen. Amazing to hear your work. Hope to take a class with you someday and learn more about it. I was curious what you think about, you sound like somebody who is very interested in expanding your worldview, but also sort of identifying with the tradition, both in like your music and your morals and your values. I'm curious how you balance sort of expanding, being open-minded and learning more about things, but still sort of embodying somebody in a certain tradition of jazz or somebody who identifies with certain worldviews, and yeah, how that process has changed.
That's the question that I have totally, thank you, Nolan. That's the question, right? We share it. I'm in it with you. I'm not sure I have a great answer, but I'll say that those teachers, I put their pictures up, Yusef Lateef, George Lewis, Anthony Davis. See, it's not like I could say a paragraph from them and say, here's how you answer that question. But seeing how people answer it through their work has been really powerful. And as you probably know, what are called, there's a term creative music, which if you've never heard it before, you think, well, isn't all music creative? But it was a term developed in the 60s by Black American experimental musicians who were coming out of jazz traditions but wanted to have a broader purview for the work they did and wanted to link their artistic goals and aesthetics with political projects. And so it has a broad meaning, a long set of complicated histories. But within that world, there's a very strong emphasis on this idea of kind of a deconstructive way of looking at that question. Like there's no need to actually make it a binary, like either you're in a tradition or you're doing something new. That you know, another person to look at, this is more of I can give you later, but Anthony Braxton has a great 3-part way of theorizing about that. He calls restructuralism the innovative part, and you know, he's got this whole sort of, so the people who've theorized about it a lot, but really I think we can talk about it all day, but the real learning comes from seeing how people do it. Seeing how someone like Yusef could just take all of it. And in fact, one thing that he said to me once that I've written about, and it's a great quick story, so I'll just tell you, he didn't use the word improvisation. He didn't like that word because he looked it up in a dictionary one time and said that he read that the dictionary said to improvise was to do something without preparation. And he said, and he would do things, like he would write fully notated, quote unquote, classical music. He would play fully open improvisation and everything in between. And he said, every time I pick up my horn and put it in my mouth, I have over 6 decades of preparation. His point was, it doesn't matter if there's a piece of sheet music in front of me and I'm interpreting it, or I'm improvising, or everything I do comes from my history and it moves into the future. So his attitude was very much like, that's our job, what you just said. We take everything we've studied and learned and we figure out how to build on it in our own individual way. That was also very important to him and all my teachers. So it's just, the more we kind of get theoretical clarity on it, conceptually, philosophically, it's great. But doing it, how do you do it? How do you choose when to stop studying that thing and studying it? You know, that's what you're in the middle of, and I'm looking to you for inspiration because I know you're here to do, we're all in this. That's why we have a PhD program that you're in. So we're all trying to figure out what that means for each person individually. And you have to really figure that out for yourself.
Whatever happened to that young bass player in San Diego?
Oh yeah, he became a wonderful experimental musician and scholar. He did an incredible dissertation. His name is Christopher Williams. He's amazing. I haven't been in touch with him he's now got a huge European grant project on improvisation and politics. And he did this incredible dissertation, which is this he was one of the early people to use hypertext for his dissertation. And it was this wild piece based on the subway map in Amsterdam where you could get on and get off. And the guy's a super interesting artist and very tied into experimental music traditions still. So another one of George Lewis mentored so many of us. We're like an army out there of people that got inspired by him. So yeah, I've been in touch with him. He's a great guy. But at the time, I was like totally like, wow, why didn't you talk to him? But that was also, George was a very warm and welcoming person who, like, bringing an undergrad into a grad seminar like that and just saying, hey, I see a spark in you. You're really curious, creative, motivated. You might not be able to play your instrument, but we'll stick you in there and pair you with Michael. Something good will happen. Something good happened. You know, again, interbeing. So it wasn't like, all right, you don't have enough experience. You can't cut that. These are grad students. It was very, you know, he was a very creative thinker about how to teach, how to set up spaces with people, and that's been an inspiration for me too. Is it George? I see.
This on? Yeah. Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for coming. George.
A lot of Americans, I grew up in Germany, and a lot of Americans promote sports as a way to learn teamwork. And I've always thought, you know, music is another great way to do it.
Right.
My question, though, relates to the other aspect of that. People also say sports is a great way to show leadership. And you haven't really talked about leadership. You've talked all about like listening to others and working together.
Leadership. Oh.
But you've transitioned at some point. You know, how I imagine there were some challenges to transitioning into a position of leadership or wanting to promote certain things that you care about or innovations and so forth. Maybe you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
I'll try and be quick. This is just a personal thing, and I don't mean to criticize anyone else. I have a slight allergy to that word leadership. I'm just like, it's just not my thing. George Carlin has a great stick about that. He says leadership camp, when all these parents sending their kids to leadership camp now. Leadership camp, isn't that where they sent Hitler? You know, I'm kind of like, okay, that's a dark joke. But I do feel like leadership can be a way that depending on who you are and how you approach it, it can be great. It can also be like people lead in the wrong direction. And I'm really, but I know what you mean, and you've been in leadership positions on campus, and it's important. And I can say the leadership on our campus, all of my experiences, knowing those people as individuals and what they're doing, have left me very, very impressed. You know, I think our campus has good leadership, and I'm not trying to criticize that. I'm actually interested in going back down the ladder. I don't want to become a dean or anything like that. I'm chair. I want to go down back then to be a professor again. But like you said, I've been in some of these roles, chair, associate dean, directing things, this and that. It's not because I want to lead anybody. It's because I see these opportunities for really cool things to happen if we can get people together and work and create some new possibilities. And to me, that's the kind of leadership that interests me, not like running a gigantic organization where I'm in charge of a lot of things. Plus, that's kind of what I said earlier, the collaborative model of leadership is kind of how it has to work in academia. As you know better than anybody in the room, having chaired the academic senate, you know, and as a chair, for example, I can't fire anybody. I can't even hire anybody. I don't have very much money to work with when everything's said and done. So there's not hard power in these roles. You have to, so it's actually someone like me who's not the aspiring CEO type is better being a chair. You know, you'd be frustrated if you wanted to run the organization. If you're chairing a department, your power is very limited. Your responsibility level is very high, and your hard power is very low, which is why people hate the job. But it's if you can find people who really understand how to collaborate, how to get new things to happen, how to nudge people in these directions, spark new ideas, and take ideas. Like, we have great ideas coming from our faculty, our students, you know, that we just need to figure out how to get them to work. So if you know the system and you can kind of figure out how to help people move the levers to get new things to happen, that's my kind of leadership. I don't associate it with that word personally. But I have great admiration, and I'm very happy with our school and campus leadership most of the time. I have my criticisms, but you know, they're great people. I mean, some of the people in these roles are amazing, and they're working really hard. So yeah, leadership is a thing. We have talked about this. We'll talk more, but thank you. You know, it's an important point. I didn't get into it just because it's kind of hard to figure out even how to do that without specifically getting into some things that are, it's hard. It's hard to talk about what's going on right now here. It's very complicated, but thank you. It's a great question. Any comments, questions, other thoughts? I know we got to wrap up in about 5 minutes, but I'm around. Anyone on
That's
Zoom?
oh, I was struck by your reflection on being devastated.
Is
but
that
then-
Andrew?
This is Andrew. Yes.
Hey,
nice to see you.
Andrew. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure. Good
Yeah, yeah.
to see you.
This moment of devastation becoming this beautiful touch point for a new beginning, right? Or for opening your eyes. And I guess like when I sort of think about some of our students or our faculty, like how do you encourage students? You talked about sort of how Lewis was set that up so that you could experience it in that way. But how do you make sure not to stay in the devastation, or sort of how do you sort of
Really hard.
find new growth from that?
I'm looking to advice from all the professors. We have great teaching faculty in DTEI. We're all trying to figure this out, right? That's kind of like I said, no, that's the question. We're in this together. It's really hard teaching, and it doesn't always work. I mean, my strategy is partly shaped by the fact that in music we have a lot of classes that are small. So we actually kind of, in repeated sequential, so some of the cases where I'm having to do something potentially devastating like that, I know the student well. I have cases where I've worked with students one-on-one for years or in small groups. It's harder to do that when you're teaching classes of hundreds, right, or 80 or 60, although I teach those classes too. So it's really context-based, but I think it's about building a sense of trust. Even though I didn't know George Lewis well by that point, I had a sense of trust that allowed me to just not be like, this guy, I'm going to drop out, And so I was also committed. I'd literally move. So you're not going to cut and run just because of one bad class when you pick up and move across the country. So there's also you have to scale sometimes your critiques with students to what their investment level is, what they're ready to hear. You have to be very, and I get it wrong all the time. I mean, we all make mistakes, and you just can't get it right all the time. You sometimes are trying to get something across to a student that you feel like you need to get across to them, and maybe you didn't do it the right way. Maybe it's on them, and they weren't ready to hear it. Who knows? It's hard to figure out where what's really going on. But sometimes you do lose people sometimes because of trying to really push them to a new level. On the other hand, I'm probably one of the more friendlier teachers in terms of erring on the side of not being like in the classical music world and the jazz music world, music can be brutal. People can just, in front of a group, just destroy you. And it's not like telling you got that multiple choice question on your math assignment wrong. It's like very personal when you spend months trying to prepare some deeply meaningful artistic expression and you get up in front of a group of people in your studio class and you perform this piece and your teacher just destroys you. It's harsh. So we have a lot of conversation in the music department about okay, some teachers, they feel like I went through that was good for me. I teach that way, and some students love it, some students hate it. How do we evaluate, is this effective teaching? That's the way CAP and our AP system understand it, right? Is that effective teaching? It's hard to call. Effective teaching is not just patting everybody on the back and saying, you're doing great, but it's also not going in and just like, you were out of tune, you suck. It's not. Where is it? And every teacher has to find their own way in that. And actually, one of the hardest things about chairing a department is having a whole bunch of faculty who all see this from a different lens and teach in different ways, and hundreds of students who all see it in different ways, and dealing in the arts with how much people are bringing themselves personally into their work, so that it's a very personal feeling of being crushed when things like that happen. So that's part of our challenge in the arts that we really deal with. And I'd love to hear your advice on that. If we're giving your work, but yeah, we need more conversations about this ongoing. It's an ongoing question. I see you're like ready to call it. I'm sensitive to time.
We're just about on
musician,
time.
Gigs up.
Yes.
So I don't know if there's more. I'll try to be quick, but
Anyone else?
more notes? Oh, I'm sorry. I almost brought my instrument to play, but then I wouldn't have had much time to talk. So come out to our concerts. There's a Jazz Combos concert tomorrow. Jamie gets it. She's our marketing. So tomorrow night, Jazz Combos concert in Smith Hall. Free, I think. Free. 8 p.m. Smith Hall. Wonderful student groups tomorrow night playing jazz. Come out and join us. And if you have more questions, I'm here around all the time. Please find me. Love to talk to people. So thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that conversation. That was really great.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone who attended on Zoom, in person. There's a survey. If you're able to complete that and turn it back to Debbie in the back, that would be really much appreciated. We really take your feedback seriously. So thank you all again.